Okay, so get ready because today we're diving into some seriously heavy stuff.
Really gonna make you think.
Yeah, we're talking about Stanley Milgram and those obedience experiments he did back in '63.
Definitely infamous.
Yeah, infamous is a good word for it. Pretty dark stuff,
Yeah,
but also I think really fascinating, right?
absolutely.
It gets to the heart of human nature and how we react to authority.
hmm
And for this deep dive, we're going straight to the source, Milgram's own paper.
The Behavioral Study of Obedience
Exactly, that's the
in
one.
1963.
So just a quick recap for anyone who maybe needs a refresher on this experiment.
The setup here was
Yeah.
he had people come into the lab, right?
Yeah, so they thought they were going to be part of like a learning and memory study or something.
Right, exactly. And they were told that they had to deliver electric shocks to another person.
Who they thought was another participant.
Right, but it wasn't.
He was an actor.
An actor. The whole thing was staged.
And not only that, but the shocks weren't even real.
Yeah, totally fake.
But here's the thing, the participants, they didn't know that.
Exactly, and that's what's so crazy about it. Like, they totally believed they were inflicting pain on this other person.
Which is just, I mean, when I first read about this
It's
experiment,
disturbing, yeah.
it's just really disturbing.
It really makes you question, like, what would I do in that situation?
Exactly. And, it's easy to sit here and say, oh, I would never do that. But,
You never really know until you're in that situation.
right, exactly. And that's what Milgram was trying to figure out, like,
How far would people go? When an authority figure tells them to do something,
especially when it goes against their own morals.
it's like that conflict between what you think is right and what you're being told to do.
Exactly. And it's not always easy to do the right thing, especially when you've got someone in a position of authority telling you to do something else.
Especially when it's at a place like Yale.
Oh, right. So tell me more about that, because this wasn't just some random experiment. It was at Yale University.
Exactly. It's a very prestigious institution.
Yeah, like you're going to trust a guy in a lab coat at Yale.
Right. And that's part of what Milgram was looking at, the power of authority.
And he went all out to make this feel super legit.
Oh, yeah. He wanted the participants to believe this was the real deal. So he had this whole elaborate setup.
Right, like that whole shock generator panel.
Oh, my gosh. Yeah, he had it engraved, like, by professionals.
I know, like who knew attention to detail could be so creepy?
Right. Like, talk about commitment to the experiment, but it worked. Like, the participants totally bought it.
They really thought they were inflicting pain.
Yeah, and that's what makes the results of the study even more unsettling.
Yeah, let's talk about that because the results were pretty shocking.
Yeah, to say the least.
So you've got these participants, they're at Yale,
They're hooked up to this machine.
thinking they're delivering real shocks,
And the person on the other side, the learner, is crying out in pain.
which again was all an act, but still.
It was all part of the experiment.
But here's the crazy part. Despite all of that, a majority of the participants, they went all the way.
They delivered the highest level of shock.
The highest level.
Can you believe that?
I mean, I know I keep saying this, but it's just mind-blowing.
It really makes you question human nature, doesn't it?
It really does. And what's even more surprising is that before Milgram even did the experiment.
Yeah, he asked people what they thought would happen.
Right, like what percentage of people do you think would go all the way?
And almost nobody thought people would actually do it.
Almost no one predicted this level of obedience.
They thought people would stop, like their conscience would kick in.
Right, you would think so, right?
But nope, they just kept going.
It's wild. And you know what's really unsettling? Milgram, he included these quotes in the paper.
From the participants.
Yeah, from the people who, like, they objected, They were like, I don't know if I should do this, but then they still obeyed.
Wow.
It's like you can almost hear their internal struggle.
That moral conflict.
Yeah, it's really heartbreaking to read.
You know, one detail that always gets me is that Milgram observed this nervous laughter in some participants.
Nervous laughter.
Yeah, not like a genuine laugh,
Right.
but this kind of uneasy, uncomfortable laughter,
Wow, that's even more disturbing.
It's like a coping mechanism for the stress and the guilt they were feeling.
It's like their brain just couldn't process what was happening.
Exactly, and it just goes to show how powerful the situation was.
Okay, so we've established that people are capable of being way more obedient than we might think, even when it means hurting someone else.
Yeah, that's the scary part.
But the big question is, why?
Why would so many people choose to follow orders, even when they knew it was wrong?
Like, what's going on in their minds?
That's the million-dollar question, right?
Right, and that's what we're going to try to unpack.
Dig into Milgram's analysis.
Exactly.
Try to understand what led to these shocking results.
Because clearly something is going on here.
Oh, absolutely.
It's not just about being a good or bad person. There's got to be more to it than that.
Right. It's way more complex than that.
Okay, so let's get into it.
Let's break it down.
What are some of the factors that might explain this?
Well, first, we have to talk about the power of authority.
Okay, yeah, because like we were saying before, this was at Yale.
Exactly, and that holds a lot of weight, right?
It's like, oh, it's Yale, it must be fine.
Right. People are more likely to obey someone they perceive as an authority figure.
And especially in that setting, like, it's Yale. It's not just some random dude on the street telling you to do this. It's like we almost want to believe that we're better than that, you know?
Yeah, totally. Like, oh, I would never fall for that, but...
Right, but Milgram's research kind of throws that whole idea out the window.
It really does, because it shows us that it's not about good people versus bad people.
It's about the situation.
Exactly. It's those subtle pressures, the expectations.
Right, like even if no one's explicitly telling you to do something, you still feel that pull, that need to conform.
Especially when you're in a situation where you feel like you have to prove yourself.
Or when you don't want to rock the boat.
Exactly. And that's why Milgram's work is still so relevant today.
Even though these experiments were done decades ago.
Because those same forces are still at play, right? Like we see it in workplaces, in schools.
Oh, absolutely. Think about how often we just go along with things, even if we have a gut feeling that something's not quite right.
Because you don't want to get in trouble. Or you think, oh, they must know what they're doing.
Right, exactly.
And that's where Milgram's work can be a wake-up call.
Okay, so how do we actually apply this to our own lives? Like, how do we become more aware of these forces so we can make better choices?
Well, I think the first step is just awareness,
Yeah.
right? Like, just knowing that these psychological traps exist can help us to be more vigilant.
So we can recognize them when we're in those situations.
Exactly. And once you're aware of the trap, you can start to look for ways to avoid it.
So, like, what are some practical things we can do?
Well, I think one important thing is to develop your critical thinking skills.
Okay, so, like, don't just take everything at face value.
Exactly. Question your assumptions. Ask questions. Do your own research.
Especially if something feels off.
Right. Like, if your gut is telling you something's wrong, don't ignore it.
It's like that old saying, if it seems too good to be true, it probably is.
Totally. And don't be afraid to get a second opinion.
Yeah, like talk to someone you trust, get their perspective.
Exactly. Sometimes just talking things through can help you see things more clearly.
And it can give you the confidence to speak up if you need to.
Absolutely. And that's another important thing, finding your voice, being willing to speak up even when it's uncomfortable.
Because that's how we challenge authority, right? Not by blindly obeying, but by engaging in thoughtful dissent.
Exactly. And it's not always easy, but it's so important.
Because ultimately, we're all responsible for our own actions, right?
100%.
We can't just hide behind, oh, well, I was just following orders.
Right. That's not an excuse.
We have to be willing to stand up for what we believe in, even when it's hard.
And I think that's really the biggest takeaway from Milgram's work.
It's not about being perfect or always knowing the right answer.
It's about being aware, being critical, and being brave enough to stand up for what you think is right.
Even when everyone else is telling you to do something different.
Exactly.
You know, it's more about having the courage to trust your own judgment.
Yeah, like to question things, even when it feels risky.
Exactly, because blind obedience, that's what got us into trouble in the first place.
That's what Milgram was trying to show us.
It's like he was saying, hey, this is what we're capable of, even the best of us.
Yeah, and we need to be aware of that so we don't repeat those mistakes.
Absolutely. So what can we do? How do we actually put this into practice in our own lives?
Well, for me, it always comes back to self-reflection.
Okay, I like that.
Taking the time to really think about your values, what you believe in.
So you have that internal compass to guide you.
Exactly. And then when you're faced with a situation where you're not sure what to do,
Yeah, like you're feeling that pressure to conform.
you can check in with yourself,
Ask yourself those tough questions.
Exactly. Like, is this something I'm comfortable with?
Does this align with my values?
Right. And if the answer is no,
Then you know you need to speak up.
even if it's scary.
Because it's about doing the right thing, even when it's hard.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that takes courage, but it's a muscle we can all develop.
And the more we use it, the stronger it gets.
Right. Exactly. It becomes easier to speak up, to challenge the status quo.
And to maybe even inspire others to do the same.
Now you're talking.
So it's like this ripple effect, right?
Yeah.
It starts with each of us being a little braver, a little more willing to stand up for what we believe in.
And who knows, maybe we can actually make a difference.
I love that it all comes back to personal responsibility,
Totally.
taking ownership of our choices and our actions,
And realizing that we all have the power to make a difference.
even in small ways.
Absolutely.
Well, this has been a fascinating and honestly kind of terrifying deep dive.
It makes you think, that's for
It
sure.
really does, but in a good way, you know?
Yeah, definitely.
It's like a good kick in the pants to remind us to be more aware, more critical, and to never just blindly follow the crowd.
Couldn't have said it better
Yeah.
myself.
So, to our listeners out there, keep those questions coming.
And keep diving deep.
Absolutely. Until next time.